Christian Balke Thompson was a 26-year-old man from Carroll, Iowa, whose disappearance in May 2020 eventually became a cold case that went unresolved for nearly 6 years. Balke Thompson was reported missing by his family after he was last seen in the early morning hours of May 2, 2020. At the time, family members became concerned when they had not heard from him for an unusually long period and were unable to reach him by phone. Balke Thompson's disappearance was initially treated as a missing person case by law enforcement, and his family hoped that he would be located safely. Christian Balke Thompson's last confirmed activity came in the early hours of May 2, 2020. Investigators were able to trace the last known location of his cell phone when it pinged near the 22,000 block of 150th Avenue in Carroll County, a rural area about 5 miles north of Carroll. That same area would later become significant in the investigation. Around that period, Balke Thompson had been with a friend at a residence in Rockwell City, Iowa, and they left together in his 1997 green Toyota Corolla. Records show that the two had made stops at a convenience store in Lake City and then another store on the west side of Fort Dodge before the vehicle's last known movements. On May 4, 2020, 2 days after Balke Thompson was last seen, authorities in Carroll County responded to a structure fire call at a rural property along 150th Street. A shed at the location was burning, and inside, investigators found a burned 4-door sedan that was unrecognizable due to fire damage. At that time, law enforcement was not immediately aware that the vehicle was linked to Balke Thompson. It was only later that the connection became evident. The property where the fire occurred was later identified as belonging to a man named Albert John Wolfe, an acquaintance of Balke Thompson. The next day, May 5th, Balke Thompson's mother went to the Carroll County property with another woman to check on his whereabouts. Albert John Wolfe met them at the driveway and denied any knowledge of Balke Thompson's whereabouts, subsequently telling them to leave. On that same day, the Rockwell City Police Department received a missing person report after friends and relatives officially reported Balke Thompson unaccounted for. The vehicle found in the shed from the previous night was eventually confirmed to be Balke Thompson's Toyota after investigators compared engine components and rear light moldings with images of that model. Following the discovery of the burned vehicle, law enforcement executed a search warrant on Wolfe's property. During this period, investigators noticed fresh activity around the burn site, including a car that had been buried under dirt, manure, and other debris in an apparent attempt to conceal it. Because the vehicle had been extensively burned and covered, it was impossible to read the vehicle identification number, but other characteristics matched Balke Thompson's. Phone calls to his number during this time went directly to voicemail, further raising concern among family and authorities that he had not simply left voluntarily. Over the next few years, investigators conducted multiple searches of the property and followed up on numerous tips, but Balke Thompson was never located. The case eventually went cold as no additional definitive physical evidence or eyewitness testimony was publicly available that could directly link a suspect to the disappearance or presumed death. Law enforcement continued to investigate periodically, but progress remained limited until new developments emerged years later. In January 2026, nearly 6 years after Balke Thompson was reported missing, the Iowa Cold Case Unit, a specialized team created by the Iowa Attorney General's Office in 2024 to re-examine unresolved cases, announced a major development in the investigation. Authorities from the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, and the Iowa Attorney General's Office announced the arrest of a suspect in the case. The suspect, 33-year-old Albert John Wolfe of Lanesboro, Iowa, was taken into custody and charged with murder in the first degree in connection with Balke Thompson's disappearance. Court documents and arrest affidavits released in connection with Wolfe's arrest outlined aspects of the evidence that led to the charge. Wolfe admitted to investigators that he had dismantled and cut up Balke Thompson's Toyota after the fire, but he denied knowing anything about Balke Thompson's disappearance or death. Wolfe claimed that the car was burned in the shed during the fire, and that he had found a phone in a plastic bag near his mailbox, which was later determined to be Balke Thompson's phone. The arrest followed interviews with a key witness, described in court filings as a friend of Balke Thompson who had been with him on the day of his disappearance. According to that witness's statement, the two had been together earlier on May 2, 2020, in Balke Thompson's vehicle when they drove to Wolfe's farm. The witness said that Wolfe instructed her to pull the car into the shed and then went into the house. A short time later, the witness reported hearing what she believed to be a shotgun bust. When she ran outside, she said she saw Wolfe had shot Balke Thompson. The witness stated that Wolfe then wrapped Balke Thompson's body in a tarp and set it on fire in a burn pile. The witness stayed on Wolfe's property for an extended period after the alleged incident before eventually leaving. Despite the arrest and the witness testimony, investigators have not recovered Balke Thompson's body.
Multiple searches of Wolf's property since 2020, including those conducted as part of the renewed investigation, have not produced physical remains. While the burned car and the last phone ping linked Balke Thompson to Wolf's property, the absence of a recovered body means that the murder charge is based on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. Legal proceedings following Wolf's arrest are ongoing. Upon his arrest in January 2026, Wolf was taken to the Carroll County Jail, and prosecutors from the Iowa Attorney General's Office and the Carroll County Attorney's Office will prosecute the murder charge. A criminal charge is an accusation, and under law, Wolf is presumed innocent until proven guilty in court. Details such as bond conditions, arraignment, and pretrial hearings are part of the judicial process that will determine how the case progresses toward a potential trial. Investigators involved in the case have acknowledged that the arrest represents a significant development after years of limited progress. Attorney General Brenna Bird described the arrest as a milestone in seeking justice for Christian Balke Thompson and his family, and emphasized that no family should have to wait for answers in such cases. The Iowa Cold Case Unit's role in re-examining leads and conducting renewed interviews was instrumental in bringing the matter to the point where a suspect could be arrested and charged. The ongoing investigation remains active, and law enforcement continues to encourage anyone with additional information related to the disappearance and presumed death of Balke Thompson to come forward. Cold case investigations often rely on a combination of re-examining old evidence, interviewing witnesses, and following up on new information that might come to light even years after a crime. Christian Balke Thompson's case reflects the challenges associated with missing person cases that evolve into presumed homicides, especially in situations where a body has not been recovered. The efforts of law enforcement agencies over an extended period, culminating in an arrest, illustrate the persistence required to pursue unresolved cases. Family members in the community have awaited answers for years, and while an arrest has been made, the legal process will determine how the allegations are ultimately resolved in court.
Edmund LaFave was a 34-year-old man living in the North Park neighborhood of San Diego, California, when he was murdered on February 25, 1975. On that date, police responded to a call at a residence on the 2900 block of Suncrest Drive after a friend of LaFave reported concern for his welfare. Officers entering the home discovered LaFave lying on the floor of his bedroom in a pool of blood. He had been beaten and stabbed multiple times. The San Diego Police Department categorized his death as a homicide. Investigators at the time conducted an initial homicide investigation. They processed the crime scene for physical evidence and interviewed anyone who might have had contact with LaFave in the period leading up to his death. Despite these efforts, detectives were unable to identify a suspect or develop decisive leads. Key evidence from the scene, including biological material and fingerprints, was collected and retained. However, the limitations of forensic technology in 1975 meant that no usable DNA profile could be developed from the preserved materials. The San Diego case file ultimately became inactive and was classified as a cold case. For decades, the homicide remained unsolved. Periodically, cold case investigators from the San Diego Police Department reviewed the evidence, but without new leads or forensic tools capable of generating usable DNA data, the case remained unresolved. LaFave's family did not receive answers about who was responsible for his death and why he was killed. The community knew the case only as an unsolved murder from nearly a half-century earlier. Beginning in the early 2000s and accelerating in the 2010s and 2020s, advances in forensic science changed how cold cases were investigated. Techniques such as forensic investigative genetic genealogy became available. This approach involves developing a comprehensive DNA profile from crime scene evidence and then using genealogical databases and family tree analysis to identify potential relatives of an unknown suspect. Investigators use these leads to narrow down to specific individuals who might match the DNA profile. In LaFave's case, retired and active cold case investigators continued to carefully preserve the evidence from the original 1975 investigation. In 2023, the San Diego County District Attorney's Office coordinated with Othram, a forensic science laboratory in Texas, to submit aged forensic material for modern analysis. Using advanced DNA sequencing technology and genome assembly methods not available to investigators in the 1970s, scientists were able to develop a detailed DNA profile from the decades-old forensic evidence. Once a DNA profile was generated, the profile was entered into investigative genetic genealogy searches. Genealogists located potential familial matches by examining public genetic databases and constructing extended family trees. Through that research, investigators developed leads pointing toward a specific individual as a possible suspect in LaFave's killing. The genealogical leads were then followed up by law enforcement with traditional detective work, including corroborating records, historical addresses, and other identifying information. Based on that combined investigative work, authorities identified 71-year-old Johnnie Salisbury, a resident of Syracuse, Indiana, as a suspect in the murder. Salisbury was 21 years old at the time of LaFave's death in 1975. Investigators identified him as a potential suspect through genealogical evidence that led to his DNA, as well as other evidence linking him to the crime.
In January 2026, law enforcement officers executed an arrest warrant for Salisbury stemming from the LaFave cold case. He was taken into custody in northwestern Indiana by local law enforcement, including cooperation between San Diego detectives and Indiana authorities. Salisbury was booked into the Kosciuszko County Jail in Warsaw, Indiana, on a homicide warrant. He was held pending an extradition hearing that would return him to California to face charges stemming from the 1975 killing. San Diego police credited genetic genealogy and modern forensic methods with generating the leads that resulted in Salisbury's identification and arrest. They indicated that the use of advanced DNA technology was critical in connecting the decades-old forensic evidence to a living suspect. Officers also noted that the fingerprints found at the original crime scene, including on a bloody clothes iron believed to have been used in the attack on LaFave, matched Salisbury's prints. According to prosecutors, this fingerprint evidence combined with genealogical data was significant in establishing probable cause for the arrest. Following his arrest, Salisbury was extradited to San Diego, where he appeared in San Diego Superior Court in early 2026 and entered a plea of not guilty to the murder charge. During his initial court appearance, prosecutors outlined that LaFave had been beaten and stabbed more than 30 times inside his home in 1975. The arraignment marked the first time a suspect faced formal charges in connection with LaFave's homicide more than a half-century after the killing. Salisbury's defense has maintained his innocence, arguing that he did not kill LaFave. Legal proceedings, including a preliminary hearing, have been scheduled as the case moves through the judicial process. Prosecutors are preparing to present the evidence developed through the investigation, including the forensic genealogy results and fingerprint matches, at future pretrial hearings. As with all criminal cases in the United States, Salisbury is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in court. Authorities have not disclosed a motive for LaFave's murder or the nature of any prior relationship between the victim and the suspect. Despite extensive investigative work both at the time of the homicide and in the decades following, no definitive motive has been established publicly. Law enforcement has stated that the original 1975 investigation uncovered no clear indication of why LaFave was targeted or whether he knew his killer prior to the crime. The arrest in the LaFave case represents part of a broader trend in law enforcement's use of modern forensic science to re-examine cold cases and bring potential suspects to justice long after initial investigation stalled. Genetic genealogy has been used in numerous cases across the United States to identify suspects in killings that lacked actionable leads at the time of the crime. LaFave's case is among many where decades-old biological evidence has yielded new results through updated scientific methods. The San Diego Police Department's Cold Case Unit, which was established in 1995 to focus on unsolved homicides, reviewed LaFave's case multiple times before the eventual breakthrough. Detectives retained key evidence from the original investigation that proved crucial for modern testing. The persistence in preserving and revisiting the case over decades is cited by authorities as essential to achieving the recent identification of a suspect. Family members of LaFave and community observers have followed the developments in the case since the arrest. While the passage of more than 50 years has meant that some contemporaries of the original crime are no longer living, the reopening and resolution of the cold case has brought renewed public attention to the homicide. Friends and relatives have expressed that the arrest represents progress toward accountability, even after many years without answers. The legal process in the LaFave case will continue as prosecutors and defense attorneys prepare for further hearings and potentially a trial. The evidence obtained through modern investigative techniques, combined with historical physical evidence, forms the basis for the prosecution's case. Defense strategies are expected to challenge aspects of the presentation of evidence and procedural matters, as common in cases involving long-resolved cold cases. The identification, arrest, and arraignment of a suspect in the 1975 murder of Edmund LaFave underscores the continued evolution of forensic science and its application to long-standing criminal investigations. It illustrates how preserved evidence from an unsolved homicide can decades later be re-examined using contemporary technology to yield actionable leads and support criminal prosecution.